Hello everyone, thanks for watching this episode of Vroom Fume. I am Ryan, your host like always, and today I'm going to talk about an interesting one. So this is going to be BMW's 5-liter S85 V10, and it's very well known connecting rod bearing failure. So if you're watching this, you probably are considering purchasing one or owning one because they're like extremely dirt cheap um, for a reason, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, if you want to learn more, just keep watching. So just as a real introduction as to what it is, it's inspired by BMW's previous involvement in Formula One. And it is a high-performance V10 produced from 2005 to 2010. It exclusively powered BMW's M series variants of the E60 and E61 5 series sedan, which is called the M5, and the E63 and E64 6 series coupe and convertible, which is called the V6, which is called the M6. And it was also used in, I believe this is pronounced, the Weissman GT MF5 2-seat Roadster for a very limited time from 2009 to 2010. The engine itself, it uses a dual overhead cam valve train layout with the company's version of variable valve timing called Vanos. And as of today, it was BMW's first and only V10 engine, as far as I'm aware. So the issue, the S85, despite its relatively small production quantity and use in very few vehicles and expensive ones, its very well-known issue, impeding its long-term reliability, is its excessive connecting rod bearing failure. So yes, even an expensive, meticulously designed engine is not exempt from catastrophic problems and design oversights, which is a real shame. The root cause of this problem, though, is very debated, especially in owner forums, as I've read through a lot of them. So with connecting rod bearing failure, it occurs over time if insufficient oil cannot properly lubricate the bearings. So some believe this issue stems from the bearing design itself, or the engine's tight tolerances, or the weight of the oil BMW recommends, but all three combined might be responsible for the issue. But by far the most prominent theory, at least from what I've been reading, is the oil viscosity BMW recommends is the problem because it may be too thick to lubricate the bearings properly. So if the S85 BMW recommends an oil rating I've never even heard of being used in a everyday car, or well, not every day, but just a car engine, which is 10W60, and that is extremely thick, I believe, for a modern engine, because most gas engines used in cars today is either like 0W20 or 5W30. That's what we use in our vehicles, 5W30. So I guess to put that into perspective, at operating temperature, BMW with this engine is using an oil weight that is 3 times thicker than a 20 weight and twice as thick as a 30 weight. And I believe a 30 weight oil is already reasonably thick to begin with. So because this is a high performance engine, its manufacturing processes are going to be very tighter, I would say, much tighter tolerances than what is found in everyday engine you see on the road, just in normal cars. And so the tight tolerances, that basically just means there's smaller gaps and spaces between internal components. So this in of itself, it's not a bad thing, but problems can arise if the passageways are maybe a little too small, especially if the oil being used is too thick, where it can't easily flow through the passageways to lubricate the rod bearing in general. So this inadequate lubrication, it could lead to accelerated wear on other parts, such as the engine's vanos system. And since its operation depends on correct oil pressures, too thick of an oil could result in too high of a pressure, which that can damage other things, which that can damage the system. So if you want to own or buy a vehicle with this engine, unfortunately, there does not seem to be a one-time fix to prevent this rod bearing wear, because there's several things that are likely contributing to it, and some of which cannot be changed, such as the tolerances. That's just the way the engine is designed. It's really not a question of if it's going to fail, it's when. And maintenance and luck really determine when it will happen. Replacement, it could be deferred. I think I've seen as long as 80,000 miles or as early as 50,000 miles, so it can fail relatively early and start having issues. So at first, the solution to preventing the issue, it may seem to use a slightly thinner oil, but the issue with that is you have to consider the other implications that has on other components, such as the vanos system. So like rod bearings, variable valve timing, it requires oil to flow through these tiny passageways, and could have even tighter or looser tolerances than the rod bearings themselves. So just as an example, a 30-way oil, it may, let's just say it adequately lubricates the vanos, but not the rod bearings. But a 40-way may lubricate the rod bearings, but not the vanos. So, in other words, it's possible that because of the way different components are designed in their differing tolerances, one oil weight cannot satisfy all the lubrication requirements this engine has. That's my guess. So if that's the case, it's really a lose-lose situation for both the owner and the engine. So basically, the engine is slowly, with this theory, destroying itself from the inside out, and really the only thing the owner can do is to just try to slow the rate of wear. And regardless if owners decide to use thinner oil, really the best actions they can take to slow down rod bearing wear is to change the oil at a shorter interval than what BMW recommends, and at least in my opinion, let the engine fully warm up before driving, or especially spirited driving at the minimum. Because when the engine reaches operating temperature, the oil, it becomes slightly thinner than what it was when it was cold, and it could have some better flow properties if it's warmed up. And it's also worth mentioning that engine oil containing more zinc, it might help with the metal-to-metal contact this engine experiences, because zinc helps prevent this contact between engine parts by forming a protective film. And it's commonly used in racing engines from what I've heard, and I would say the S85 is definitely considered a racing engine. So using oil containing more zinc, I would say that won't guarantee the complete elimination of this premature rod bearing wear, but I would say it could extend the time until the parts replacement is required. And with this engine, other symptoms of worn bearings could include metal shavings in the engine oil, or from what I've heard online, a ticking sound at low RPM and idle, though ticking could stem from the vanos itself. And if metal shavings are present in the oil, then the rod bearings need replacing as soon as possible to prevent other problems. And like I kind of said, preventative maintenance, it's critical with this engine. This repair, it does need to be taken seriously, and it really cannot be put off for too long, or else it would just cost you more money. So if you want to buy an engine, if you want to buy a vehicle with this engine, before answering that question, I think a better question to ask is, do I want a fire-breathing 500 horsepower car with a top speed of around 190 miles per hour? If your answer is no, then this definitely is not the engine for you, and something more mainstream would be a wiser choice. If your answer is yes, then you need to ask yourself, am I willing to spend thousands of dollars on maintaining the car, with a lot of the cost going towards maintaining the engine? So owning a BMW M5 or an M6 with the S85, it is not for the faint of heart. Its reliability really is not good. Its maintenance costs are sky high. Even within the owner community, it's regarded as being one of the least reliable or worst BMW engines ever made. So if you really want this engine, you really desire a car that's track ready, if you can even find a track to race on, and you seek a performance thrill, leaving your heart pounding no matter how many reliability headaches it will cause you. So personally, the S85 is actually one of my favorite engines due to its performance and unmistakable sound, but I would, unless if I had lots and lots of money to throw away, I would not want to own one because the cost of ownership. If you still want one, I would really suggest you get all the maintenance records the owner has on it before buying. Hoping the engine's rod bearings were already replaced. That would be great if that was done recently, because that alone, that will save you thousands of dollars. And it might be worth trying different oil weights other than BMW's recommendation, in hopes of mitigating the rod bearing wear, but this is risky, because when I researched the correct oil for this engine, I briefly came across from a comment from an owner that 10W40 weight with extra zinc mitigates the bearing wear, but I would say more research is needed, and given I do not own this engine, I don't have any personal experience with it, so I cannot verify at all if that is a definitive fix. Yeah, so the S85, it's really one of BMW's most beloved yet hated engines at the same time, depending on whether you're asking a car enthusiast or a mechanic that works on them. And historically, the reality is BMWs are really not known for long-term reliability, and the engineers, I believe they could have made this engine a lot more reliable, but had they have designed it a little differently, starting with maybe slightly looser tolerances. So this engine, it's really a great example of the importance of using an engine oil that adequately lubricates all components rather than only a few. And with every engine, it's really essential to use a viscosity that's not too thick but not too thin at the same time. But it's also okay to decide on one based on your geographic location, such as if you live somewhere where it's very cold, it would be a better choice to use a thinner oil, but if you live somewhere that's very hot, like me, it's going to be better to use a little bit of a thicker oil. But this is kind of debated. As a general rule of thumb, it's best to follow the automaker's recommendation that's stated in the owner's manual, but there are cases such as the S85 where their recommendations may not be correct. And interestingly, with the next generation M5 called, I believe, the F10 and F90, using the twin turbocharged S63 V8 rather than the S85 V10, the recommended oil weight for that is no longer a 60 weight, it's actually a 30 or a 40 weight. So this makes me wonder if BMW realized the oil used in the S85 was too thick and partly responsible for causing catastrophic damage, so they decided to use a thinner weight for their future engines and design tolerances accordingly. So that question might never be answered, though it makes me wonder how long BMW knew about this problem, but clearly they did not have any interest or very little interest in addressing the issue, despite a mountain of owner complaints. And that's about it. Now you know the truth behind BMW's unfortunately troublesome S85 V10. I hope you found this information informative and helpful. If you still have questions or comments about the issue, I'd love to help. Feel free to leave them in the comments section below. And on that note, I will see you next time.